Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Clint Warren-Davey, who's an Australian high school teacher and war game designer and player of games. And in this conversation, we talk about history as it regards to games and wars and the West and the East and what gaming teaches us about what it is to be human and the reality of politics and friends and enemies. He's a great guy. Even if you're not into board games, this is a very rich conversation with a lot of impactful insights into current, past, and future events. You can find links to his work down there in the description, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Clint Warren-Davey. I can't imagine how much work goes into designing a functional game, let alone an enjoyable game.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's fun. It's enjoyable. I mean, that's why I do it. Like, I feel like I have to do it. Like, I can't not make games. I'm always making games.
Really?
I don't know why. Yeah.
When did that start?
I mean, probably 20 years ago, like when I was a teenager in high school, I got the idea that I wanted to make games. But it's only really since COVID that I took it seriously because I had time. And I thought I'm going to actually do this thing that I wanted to do all my life and actually get published, like actually pitch my games to publishers and get them made. And then since then, I've just been basically doing it nonstop. So that when I have time, aside from my day job and my family and my other commitments, but and I've just been pumping them out, and it's just great. I love it. It's a great industry. You don't make a lot of extra money, but it's not for the money. It's just because it's fun.
Yeah. Let's go back to your teen years. Like, what was the first game that really lit you on fire?
I would say Axis and Allies. I don't know if you've played that. It's a war game. It's a World War II war game. Yeah. No, I have a very prominent, controversial podcaster who has promised to teach me. I think it's 1940. Is that
World?
Is it Daryl Cooper?
It's Daryl Cooper, and it's a combination of East and West.
Yeah, I have that.
Okay, yeah, and he's convinced he's going to cream anybody that comes across him, and that he doesn't respect anybody's political opinion on World War II if they can't beat him at that game.
That's great. It is a good game. It's very fun. Takes all day though. Takes a whole day.
Yeah. Well, least. I mean, so describe that then. Describe the experience of going into that game. If you can bring yourself back.
Are we already recording now as well? Are we already recording?
You started on fire, so I'm rolling with it right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So describe the experience of like being a teenager, hormonal, anxious, maybe overconfident. Who knows your psychology at that point? But what really captured you with that game at that time in your life?
So Axis and Allies, and a lot of people have the same experience when you play it as a kid. It's a map of the world and little plastic pieces for tanks and planes and aircraft carriers and battleships and all kinds of military units like that. And you're moving them around the map and you're trying to sort of take over the world, I guess. But there's still a historical constraint. You play as a specific country like Germany or the USA or the Soviet Union or the UK. And each one of those countries has a totally different starting position, totally different ways of winning. And then when you get a group of friends around playing that, say there's 5 of you playing that, and you look at your pieces and you're moving battleships around and you're fighting over these countries and like, oh, I've taken France or I've taken Indochina, or the Japanese are attacking Pearl Harbor and they've sunk the American fleet. All that stuff. It just feels so epic, even though you're just moving bits of plastic around, because it's a world map and because you have a rough idea that each piece represents whatever 100,000 soldiers or a whole fleet of ships. You just get this feeling of like conquering the world, and plus when you have a bunch of young teenage guys sitting around, usually it's guys, sometimes girls play, usually it's guys though who are into war games, and you just trash talk each other and you try and intimidate each other and make deals with each other and negotiate, and it's just so fun. It's so fun, and I haven't yet found a social activity that is as fun as that.
Yeah,
because it's all the good things about socializing. It's this friends you haven't seen for years, and you get them over to have a game, and you crack a few beers and whatever, and you talk about life in between playing the game.
Yeah.
So you're still socializing, you're still having that face-to-face interaction, but you're also, engaged in this battle for dominance, and there's an element of gambling to it as well, because there's lots of dice rolling. So
Okay.
There's an element of calculated risk. So for the same reason that people are really into betting on sports, they can get really into board games that have a lot of randomness. Plus it's skill and strategy, and it's talking to other players and planning together and maybe betraying each other. And I thought you were going to move your unit there and you moved it there. So it's such a good social experience, and that's what I'm trying to do with basically all of my games. Is the game is simply a vessel for creating social interaction. That's what it's there for. So all the games that I've been making now are multiplayer games with a lot of player interaction and interdependence and asymmetry. So that means everyone's in a different position. Everyone sort of depends on each other to get things done, and you have to interact with each other to achieve your goal. So, there's a lot of games in the world that might be defined as multiplayer solitaire.
Yeah.
So I'm playing my game, you're playing your game. I always try and do the opposite of that. Those games are good. There's nothing wrong with those games. But what I want is the interaction. So I want to force players to be talking to each other and looking at each other's position all the time.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting about the board game community, if you can use that word community, it already has a political meaning, is that it attracts and it houses a lot of people who subscribe to very progressive politic. If you don't mind the word woke, you can say woke, but which I understand because it's a hobby and it's a very nerdy hobby, and there's like probably a high prevalence of some degree of autism in there, which maps onto other social moralities. But I was thinking, I've been thinking about this because I got in the hobby just a couple years ago. But board games can't be left wing. They're essentially right wing because they're based on competition and a real honesty with resources. There are games that are more social, that are more sharing and stuff. I'm wondering if you've thought of the tension of the morality or the assumed morality within board games, especially war games. War games are not about being kind. They're about getting what you want out of other people, but also recognizing the reality of the game state in a way, being really keen and dialed into the game state, and then scheming on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of political arguments that happen within the board gaming world, but I guess broadly speaking, I think people who are really into war games are mostly sort of on the right. But a lot of that is because a lot of them have a military background. The military tends to skew to the right anyway. I myself do some work for the Australian Army, like running war games, professional military war games. So there's a lot of crossover between the professional military world and the wargaming world, and so that you're going to get the same type of people in both of those groups. But war games sound mean, but I guarantee you, if you go to a war game convention and you look at people playing them, they're really just having a lot of fun and they're really being really nice to each other. So I don't want to say it's all about the war games are all about competition and crushing the enemy and you want to
there's a
grind
difference
your enemy
between
to
the
dust,
game and then what the people that
the
are playing
meta game. Yeah, we call it the meta game. Yeah, so I mean this is my experience anyway. The people who are into war games, and I've seen this come up on social media as well. That like, hey, war gamers are all really chill. It's a really chill hobby, even though what you're doing is enacting mass violence. That's what the game is representing. Mass violence, and you might be playing a war game about the Eastern Front or whatever, and there's in the background there's millions of casualties and it's horrific and it's hell on earth. But while you're playing the game, it's a lot of fun and you're just chatting and joking back and forth and rolling dice so the meta game or the interactions that take place above the game are a lot more friendly and laid back than you would otherwise imagine, considering the subject matter. That's been my experience anyway. Some people take it too seriously. There are some people who get really competitive I know there are tournaments for Axis and Allies where there's cash prizes, and there are people who, play for hours and hours and hours, and they refine their strategies and they prepare for these games, and it gets really competitive. But most of the experience I've had in the wargaming world is it's just a fun hobby, and the people who do it are all really nice, and it's just a really good group of people. So that's and it's and we usually don't even talk politics at all. It usually doesn't even come up. It's just a good the wargaming community. It's not that big. It's a smaller subset of the board gaming world overall.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, there's lots of different types of games, but the main types, I guess, if I had to say the main types of games, you've got war games, RPGs, Euro games, and then I guess you've got family/party games, which is like the Cards Against Humanity, that type of stuff, which is like a mass market thing. But within the board gaming hobby, like people who would spend time on Board Game Geek on that website or talk about games in social media, there's really three main groups. It's war games, Euro games, and RPGs, and there's obviously crossover between them. But for some reason, a lot of people don't like war games because you are destroying each other's pieces. So it does feel confrontational. So for example, there's a lot of people that they prefer Euro games. I know I'm sure you and your audience might know what a Euro game is, but essentially Euro games are generally from a European designer, and they're focused on economic themes or non-military themes. They usually do with building up your engine and making progress in it. And they sometimes get called cube pushers. You're just pushing cubes around, like little coloured wooden cubes. But I actually really like them. They're fun. Euro games are about building up your own little engine. And some people like just doing that and not having other people come in and destroy what you've done. Like playing a solitaire game. I understand why people play solitaire games. You're just playing in your own little sandbox, right? And then with a war game, you can't do that. You might try and build up your own little engine, and someone else is going to come in and whack it off the table. Yeah. So I think because a lot of people just don't like that kind of confrontation, they will tend more towards the Euro games or the family games.
It's hard to spend time in a hobby where you put a lot of effort and you don't know to what extent your plans are going to be thwarted in one way or another. And so a Euro game, and there's more simplified, distilled Euro games than very complex Euro games, but you're competing against each other at the end. Like the end is when, and there might be some way where you block each other or some sort of minimal amount of interaction on a shared board, but you're competing against how well you can solve this puzzle against other people. So
that's right.
But a war game is maybe it has to have some of that. You have to have some sort of engine building and understanding of resource management and getting things and like strategizing on just the board and your board or your resources and stuff. But it's essentially a war game. In the word war is like.
Yeah, and there's always these arguments that rage online about what is a war game, how do you define a war game, I just define it as any kind of model that is depicting a conflict. And a conflict means you are going to be hurting or destroying other players' assets. So it's not really a war game unless there is some kind of removal or destruction or degrading of other players' assets within the game world. Yeah. So within that definition, that's there's huge varieties in war games. There's so many different war games now, and the quality's getting better and better, and the variety's getting better and better. And they use all kinds of different mechanics, but they all have that in common, that you are hurting each other's assets in some way. Now, the games that I'm trying to do, most of the war games that I make are really more like war game Euro hybrids. That's the space that I'm kind of in. I use a lot of Euro mechanics in my war games, especially because I was inspired by the Coin series. And I don't know if you know anything about the Coin series, but this is...
A lot of my audience has nothing to do with this hobby. And so...
I'll get into it. Yeah,
distill and define.
In fact, some of your audience might be interested in this because it does map onto sort of international relations and politics and stuff like that too. So the Coin series is a series of games made by a very, very good designer who I know, called Volko Runke. So he's got a very distinctive name. His name is Volko. and he works for the CIA and did a lot of work in sort of intelligence, counterintelligence. I'm not entirely exactly sure what his role is. He keeps a lot of it secret, but he was involved in studying insurgencies, in particular in like Colombia and Afghanistan and Iraq, Vietnam. But he really focused in on the insurgency that was going on in Colombia in the 1990s. And I guess I should define terms here as well. An insurgency is where there is a group within a nation that is trying to become the state. All right. So if I define our terms here, if the state is the organization within a given territory that has a monopoly on violence, so say that's what a state is. An insurgency is a group within the nation who is trying to become the state. All right. Now you can reframe that as a civil war or as a rebellion or whatever, but the technical term for that is an insurgency. There's another group trying to become the state. And this happens all over the place. This is very common in history. It's very common now, but it hadn't really been represented in war games in any kind of detailed way until Volko started looking at this insurgency in Colombia and then made a game based on it called Andean Abyss. So Andean Abyss is a game based on that insurgency in Colombia, and it's the start of a whole series in this series called COIN. And COIN is actually a military term. The Pentagon uses it. It's just it's sort of a sort of an acronym. It's counterinsurgency. So CO is counter, IN insurgency.
And almost every COIN game has at least 3. I know there's a couple of 2-player COIN games, but they're usually multiple factions that have different parameters to how they play. So that's what asymmetry means. So there's this kind of this teeter-totter on a 3 or 4 axis.
That's right, and that's what makes them so good. Is the 4-player? Most of them are 4-player, and 4 players I think is the sweet spot. That's my favorite player count, because you can have this kind of 2 versus 2. So it can become that, or it can just be 2 factions will gang up on one, and the other one gets left out, or you can have 3 on 1, or everyone will just be doing their own thing. Whereas if you have just a 3-player game, it's usually going to be 2 people will fight, and the one who doesn't fight sits back and builds up and gets an advantage or whatever. But in a 4-player, it usually ends up with this nice 2 versus 2 combo. But because the asymmetry is what makes the COIN games so good. It's because the insurgents and the government or counterinsurgent factions are totally different. They have different ways, means, and ends. So as in they have different methods, they have different assets, they have different goals that they're trying to achieve, and they just play totally differently. And in the case of Andean Abyss, the original COIN game, you have one faction is the government, one faction is a communist insurgency, one faction is a right-wing insurgency that is fighting the communists and is sort of allied with the government, but not really, because they think the government is not right-wing enough. And then another group is the drug cartels, who are an economic insurgency who are trying to make money. So those 4 factions are totally different to each other. They have a different set of actions that they can do. They've got different victory conditions. They're trying to do different things, but they always intersect with each other. So every faction has something in common with another faction. Like they might have a shared goal with another faction, and then they also have another faction which is their sworn enemy that they're trying to stop. So you have this such an interesting web of relationships between those factions, and that all that thinking about asymmetry, player interaction, player interdependence, and the different factions, that has influenced my game design a lot. So most of my designs are riffing on this idea of asymmetry and a very, very high player interaction. That's what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to bring that to Eurogame too.
What you described, is it Indian Abyss or Andean?
Andean. Sorry, my Australian accent is going to be hard to understand for your audience. Andean, as in the Andes Mountains in Colombia. So Andean Abyss.
Oh, okay.
Andean. Yeah.
Abyss.
So that's the first in the series, but the other ones in that series that are really good is Cuba Libre, which is about the Cuban Revolution in the 1950s, and Fire in the Lake. One. Yeah, there's a Philippines one. The Philippines one is 3-player. And then, Fire in the Lake is the one about the Vietnam War, which is also excellent. And I made a coin game. It's not officially part of the coin series because I have a different publisher, but it basically is still a coin game. And that is Werewolf, which is about the insurgency in occupied Germany after the war. So like there were Nazi insurgents who kept fighting after the war. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of made a game on it because no one else had made a game on that topic yet. And that was my first game that got signed to be published. But yeah, so the coin series has shaped my thinking massively.
What you were just describing about Andean Abyss, not to correct you, just to be clear to my American audience, what you're describing, all those different factions, is a much better way to understand American present political politic than this left-right thing. Yes. And this all this terminology that we use. If you start to understand, and this is kind of why I keep on trying to interview board game designers, board game content creators, is because the way that we understand politics is not really mapping onto the world as well as game designers have mapped reality onto their games. So I just want to throw that out there. But another thing about the coin series is that they're almost mostly at this point historical. They're looking back in time and then kind of doing a simulation of events. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance simulation with game?
So in the game design world, if you're deliberately making a simulation, to call your game, that means that you are striving for a very, very high level of fidelity to the historical facts. You want to make your game like play out in a very historical way, and some sort of board game experts will make a distinction between games and simulations. Like a simulation is different to a game. Simulation is trying to recreate the history, whereas a game can branch off into all kinds of different directions. And the challenge in making a historical game is you don't want to straitjacket the players or railroad the players and force them to do a historical course of action. You don't want to do that. Because then there's no point playing the game. It's like, you know what's going to happen. It would be like playing a World War II game and you know Germany has to lose. Right? Okay, it's not fun. And it's not really useful either, even from a professional military point of view. It's not that useful if it's stuck on a historical outcome. Now, at the same time, you don't want to make it go off totally crazy and have anything possible. You don't want to have it possible for the Nazis to invent a nuclear bomb in 1940 and whatever. You got to have some historical parameters. So what you do with a historical game is you just set the history as a loose set of guardrails and stay within that. So and every designer has to use their own discretion to come up with this, but they basically set some parameters at the start. I will not go beyond this, but within that, you give the players scope of action. And when you actually study history to make games, you see that it's not like everything was inevitable and it had to happen in this way. There's so many contingencies and little decisions that change things. Like, I don't think any historical war had an inevitable result. And my reasoning is simply this. If you have a war, it means both sides are fighting. And both sides are fighting because they both think they can win. Now, if it's so obvious that one side is vastly superior and they're definitely going to win, then the other side will usually just lay down and not fight. And that so sometimes a war is not a war. Sometimes it's just one group comes in and takes over another group. And it's not a war because the other group is not fighting back. That's why we have a distinction between, this what like genocide, imperialism, and war are three different things. They often get mixed up together, especially in modern discourse, like to do with in the Russian war and the Israel-Gaza war, where these words get thrown around as if they mean the same thing, or like a nation state fighting a war against another nation state is a distinct type of human action. It is not identical to imperialism or colonialism, and likewise, a massacre of civilians is not always a genocide. Anyway, you have your parameters, and you give players certain scope of action within that. And what you want to do is, ideally, in a good historical game, is to put your players in the position of a key decision maker from the time at the right level. So a classic example of this is if you're making a game about the Napoleonic Wars and the player is meant to be Napoleon himself, commanding an army on the battlefield. Napoleon himself is not worried about whether an individual battalion commander has deployed his men into a square or a column or a line, or whether he's put out skirmishes. Napoleon himself is giving orders to division commanders, who are then giving their orders to brigade commanders and so on. So if in the game you are Napoleon, that's the level of command at which you're operating, and that's the scope of decision-making that should be available to the players. So Napoleon might order a division to go over this flank, but then any micro decisions that happen within that are made by a subordinate commander that is not the player. And that's why we use dice, and that's why we use randomness. And I essentially say, so a lot of the time in game design, randomness, dice rolling, is simply to represent things that are beyond the player's control, which would include the decision-making of subordinate commanders. Or it could be, or the behavior of individual units when they come into contact with the enemy, or all those other factors. So anything that's
weather,
beyond the scope of the player. Yeah. Yes, and that's why we have a lot of dice and charts and randomness and cards and so on in wargames, because there is a lot of stuff that's beyond the commander's control.
Yeah.
So hopefully that can sort of make sense of how you can represent history.
That's what I was going to ask about when you work with professional or military level war games. I assume there's randomness that's thrown in there. How do you check randomness, and what does randomness represent? And so you kind of spoke a little bit about why randomness is introduced. One, randomness is fun, but also it represents the the interaction with reality that's beyond your control.
Yes.
How do you tune that? How do you tune randomness? I'm sure every single instance of a game is going to have a different level of it and stuff.
Yes, I've got a lot of opinions on randomness that might differ with other game designers, but I generally say that as you zoom out, I'm talking about military stuff here, like with war games. As you zoom out your scale, things get less random. So what I mean by that is, if you're a squad leader and you've got 10 guys under your control and you're in a battlefield situation, chances are a mortar shell will land nearby and kill your whole squad. There's just every second on the battlefield, there's a chance that your entire unit will be destroyed in a second. Mm-hmm. That's very high randomness. There's a high level of friction at the lower level, right, as you go down. Now, if you zoom out, if I'm a general and I have multiple divisions under my control, it's not like every second all of my divisions might vanish.
Yeah,
I don't have that randomness of and it's not like the enemy's going to pop up behind me with 1 million men because they've snuck around me. As you zoom out, things get less random. They start to flow and make more sense. And this is why when I make a large scale game, like a strategic level game, so there's strategic, operational, tactical, that's sort of the three levels of command.
Okay. Yeah.
And if I'm making a strategic level game, I'll have less dice rolling, less randomness. It'll be more focused just on the player decisions, because all those little squad level interactions, from the point of view of a general, they just get averaged out, right? They get abstract. So the general's not going to go like which particular squad got destroyed. They're going to be like, right, I ordered 3 divisions to attack 1 division. We took 25% casualties, but we took the position, right? And that's the information so it's quite deterministic. It's not just all over the place. Like anything could happen. There are possibility for dramatic reversals of fortune in war, but generally you kind of know the parameters that's going to be constraining the action and the possible results. So the more zoomed out, the less randomness I would generally include. Which means when you get down to the micro level and you're doing like squad or platoon level, you could feasibly introduce randomness to almost every step. And I know games
That's why in a role-playing game where you're playing one character interacting with other like enemies and stuff, you're rolling dice all the time. And that's how that makes sense. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. Because if you're an individual, you could break your arm, you could trip over, you could just die. You could any second, you could just and you're out. Whereas if you're in charge of a nation, if you zoom out to the highest level, grand strategic, if I'm in charge of a nation, it's not like every second there's a chance of my whole nation disappearing. But if I'm an individual, every second there is a chance that I could be killed on the battlefield, which means my whole force is destroyed. So yes, more randomness at the lower levels. Now, how we do this in the military is we still mostly just use 6-sided dice for a lot of this stuff. It's still done using 6-sided dice. Nothing wrong with that. You can use 10-sided, 20-sided, all that kind of thing. I have done some games for the Australian Army where we were using Excel spreadsheets, and we had calculations and formulas and to do all the math on the back end. We tried that, and then over time we'll just go back to the dice rolling on a chart because it's simpler. And we don't want to make if you're going to have randomness, you're going to have all these numbers. You want to bring that to the surface so that the players can see how it works and not have it hidden in like an algorithm. Yeah. Because and this is a critique I have of computer games or digital games in general. And my colleague Major Andrew Somerville, who's probably the person in the Australian Army that has done the most for pushing for more wargaming at every level of command. But he agrees with me on this, that if you have a computer or digital game, so much of the calculation is done by the computer that the player might make a decision, but they don't know. Like, they've made the input, and then they see an output, but they don't know what's happened in between because there's all these million numbers that are being calculated and they're not seeing it. Whereas if you do a board game or a tabletop game or just a physical game where the chart and the dice are on the table, like I roll a dice, I look at the chart, and I see what the result is. Yeah. That means the mechanisms that are used to resolve action, the players can see them, which means it means their decision-making is going to be more just decision-making and not like a gamble, like, I don't know how the math is going to work, I'll just try this. So it does help with the decision-making. I mean, it can give them too much of a sense of control, which is not good. You don't want to give them like a God's eye view of the battlefield. Mm-hmm. You want to have what we call friction meaning just stuff can go wrong, and your orders might get communicated wrongly, or a unit might be in the wrong spot, or just bad things can happen. You want to have that. So you got to have this randomness. You got to have the possibility of just things going wrong. But you can do that with dice. You can, a very simple way to do it would be something like, I'm simplifying a lot here, but say like you give an order to a unit, roll a dice, on a 1, it didn't receive the order and it doesn't do what you told it to do. That's like a simple way. Or you might be roll 2 dice, and if you get a double 1, not only has it not done the order you've given it, it's done some other totally random order and it's off in the wrong spot. Yeah. And there are games that do that, where you're the player, you're the general, you're giving out the orders, and you don't know whether they're going to be followed or not, or whether they're going to be interpreted properly. And that's a whole sphere of military affairs that is actually quite hard to model. It's called C2, or command and control, so CC. Mm-hmm. Command and control is hard to model because you're dealing with humans who are writing down orders and then communicating them to another human who has to implement them. And this is what the German army was so good at in World War II, was this sort of Auftragstactic or mission tactics, where a senior officer will say to his subordinate officer, this is your mission, this is your goal, use whatever means at your disposal to achieve that goal. Yeah. So that would mean that in the German army, a battalion commander is not telling the company commander exactly where to position his machine guns and his mortars and exactly what time to begin his attack. He's just saying, your goal is by this time, take that hill. And you do what you need to do to achieve that mission. And then that company commander is going to tell his platoon commanders, right, you need to do this by this time. You figure it out. And what that requires, though, is giving your officers a very high level of leeway in how they can interpret orders, and encouraging in them a sense of initiative. And basically most militaries now are trying to follow that kind of German model.
Well,
in some sense.
The weak point of that is that you have to have a culture of competence.
Yes.
Like, that's the baseline.
Yes.
Germany wasn't able to pull that off just because they adopted that model. They pulled it off because there was so many people in those hierarchies of command that could fulfill a high level of competency to achieve these things and make these decisions and stuff. So it does reflect back on the culture. If even just like writing down and reading commands and properly interpreting commands depends upon a culture of proper and unified competency with just what these terms mean, what the parameters all mean, which is reliant on education and other cultural factors that are beyond, I mean, that do show themselves. And that's why you would say, if I name 2 countries, it would be racist or something, but you could probably say there's probably some countries in one part of the world that went toe to toe with a country in another part of the world, and they use the same system. of delegation, they would just smash, one would completely smash the other because of the culture that went into everything prior to the war starting.
Yeah, that's true. And to build that culture of competency in your military, but I'm biased here, but I think wargaming is one of the best ways to do that, because if you, through repeated practice in war games, you're going to get used to the idea of formulating orders, carrying out orders, understanding all the terminology. And we do have things called, in the military, there's exercises. And an exercise is where you get out with the actual tanks and the helicopters and maybe firing ammo, and you're doing real-life maneuvering. The problem with exercises is they're really expensive. So the Australian military does one big one every year, every couple of years, called Talisman Sabre up in Queensland, where we will have
who are they fighting? Any given?
We're just an imaginary enemy,
like America or China. It's like they have to have parameters on their enemy. Okay, but I guess we won't go there. But
yeah, we just say it's always a hypothetical enemy. We don't name the enemy.
All right.
So we do like one of those, and I've spoken to officers who have maybe been able to participate in a handful of real exercises, but they cost so much money to do. So you can't train your officers only on that, because then they just don't have enough hands-on experience. So wargaming is the cheaper, more efficient way to get in the reps and the sets and get them thinking always in tactical, operational, strategic terms, and thinking in terms of how they can translate a mission intention into action. Right? So, and that's why there is a big, there has been a bigger push for wargaming across the world, in all militaries. It's not just an Australian or American thing. It's the Chinese are very good at it too. The Chinese are doing tons and tons of manual wargaming as well to train up their officer corps, to make them just so they're automatically thinking in those terms, in those terms of how do I achieve this mission with the resources at my disposal. So I think it's fascinating how much wargaming has grown over the past couple of years around the world, and how it's been
just the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always been around, but there's been
Germany invented it, from my rudimentary understanding.
Say 200 years ago, but it's like Kriegsspiel is the original war. It just means war game. That's the Prussian general staff were using that since the early 1800s. But there has been a real renaissance of wargaming in recent years, and I have to give a lot of credit to this to Sebastian Bay, who is a lecturer at Georgetown University. He's an ex-Marine, and he has really pushed for more wargaming across all the branches, like Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, Marines, and he's also travelled around to other countries, other allied countries, Japan and South Korea and Australia, and pushed for wargaming there as well. So there is a lot more of it now than there was, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. There was a fair bit of it during the Cold War. I think that there was, in the 1980s, there was a pretty good culture of wargaming in the Australian and the American Army. And then after the Cold War, it kind of died off, because there was in the Western world, we thought there's no peer competitor. There's no more Soviet Union. We're not going to have to fight big, serious wars anymore. So we're not going to even do division or corps level maneuvers. We're just going to do little squad and platoon level things. And of course, the Great War on Terror has had an effect on this, because for 20 years, the Australian Army, the American Army, and many other Western militaries were only fighting counterinsurgency operations, and not even preparing for conflict with what we call a peer competitor, which would be, in this case, Russia and China are peer competitors that can match the US. So because of that experience of 20 years of only fighting counterinsurgencies, which is in Iraq and Afghanistan, that meant a whole generation of officers and soldiers sort of grew up with that mindset. And now, and it's something like the war in Afghanistan. If Australia lost a platoon in the Afghanistan war, that's a national disaster. Like if we had an engagement in Afghanistan where we lost 30 men in a single battle, that would have been scandal making. It would probably lose an election. It would be non-stop media coverage, because it was expected these wars are like this. There was a bit of an assumption about the Iraq War and Afghanistan War that we're not really meant to lose any men in these. Like, we've got the technology. We're so much superior to these insurgents. They're just goat herders with AK-47s. We've got all the drones and the helicopters. We really shouldn't be losing anyone. But now, when we're modeling wars against a peer competitor, we need to be thinking in terms of, well, you're going to lose a brigade per day in a serious war.
Yeah.
Which we're not prepared for. I don't think we are prepared for that. And
psychologically, psychologically or materially?
Both. I think any war even on the scale of Vietnam, the amount of, the USA burnt through 50,000 airframes, like aircraft, in Vietnam. Which, when you think of Vietnam as an insurgency, and it's fought in the jungle and it's little squad level battles. No, there's an air war going on, and the US is dropping more bombs on that country than they dropped on Germany. That's an insurgency, and we couldn't fight Vietnam now. We'd have to do a major overhaul of the industrial base to do that. I think. We couldn't replace the losses at that rate, and psychologically as well. I don't think that the general public in the Western world is prepared to stomach those kind of losses, and which is good. We shouldn't be prepared, but we don't want that to happen. And I think the Chinese don't want that to happen. I think the Russians don't really want that to happen, despite their aggression in Ukraine. I really don't think the Russians want a war with NATO. So at least none of the global superpower countries, none of them really want a war. I don't think they do, because their general public, the citizens in those countries, are not going to stomach those losses. I think even the Russians, they've lost a lot of people in Ukraine. We don't know because the sources are not clear on this, but they've lost a lot of people. And if for a country like China, for them to, say, fight a war in Taiwan and lose hundreds of thousands of men is not really tenable for them either, because they've had the one-child policy for so long. Most Chinese families have only got... If they've got a son, that's their only son. If he's joined the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, and he dies in combat, then he's left two parents without... there's no generous welfare state there. They've lost their son. They've lost their only source of income. And the Chinese Communist Party still does rely on mass support to maintain its legitimacy. I don't think the Chinese Communist Party can afford to just throw away 1 million troops to take Taiwan. I think it would be a political disaster for them too. So
would it be a fun game to do a lead up to a major conflict from a post-industrial nation? I'm just thinking, because Axis and Allies, you don't have to worry about the resources. I know you have to buy the ships, and you do have to like game out, like, can I afford to create these things within this period of time? But gearing up for a war and then having the war, like you were just describing, like we don't have the material capacity to do that. I wonder if there's games that work through the building up to the war to have the war.
There are some, not many. There are some, and they're not very popular in this, and they're not being used that much. But there are a few logistics-focused games that are about the build-up. And some of them are about the logistics during the conflict as well, like sustaining the front line with supplies. And that's a very interesting concept, like logistical war games. I really like that idea. Probably the best one in that genre is Race to the Rhine, which is by a publisher called Phalanx. So that is about the Allies racing across France in 1944. And the entire game is you just funneling food, fuel, and ammunition to the front line and trying to keep it moving. So it's and you have trucks that are shifting supplies around. And that is the game. The fighting is an afterthought. It's like, as long as there's ammunition flowing to the front keeps moving. And there's another game that's used in some military institutions called Thor's Hammer, which is about a hypothetical Russian attack on Scandinavia, like say near future. And that, I haven't played that, but I've seen it being played, and it's essentially just focused on like supplying your units in modern Scandinavia, which is kind of interesting as a setting. So there are a few of these, and I've dabbled in this as well. I've made a World War II game that will hopefully be coming out next year, about the 101st Airborne Division, and that it's not just about logistics, but a big part of it is like, have supply drops coming in, and you've got to manage your food, medical supplies, ammo, artillery shells, that kind of thing, and you're managing a division, which includes allocating the supplies and making sure the men are supplied. So I think there's huge scope for that, and that is something that armies do need to do more of, is logistical wargaming, because logistics is so important, and it's often overlooked. It's often just ignored, like it's just abstracted out.
Yeah.
But Race to the Rhine is an excellent game. For anyone that wants to get interested in that type of war game, start with Race to the Rhine and the sequel, Race to Moscow. They're both excellent games, and they are just about the logistics.
What's walk me through conceiving, gestating, and delivering a game. If you want to pick one of your games that you could like describe that arc.
Yes. Well, it all kind of comes through. It's all a similar process, I guess. The first thing that is necessary if you're going to get into game design is you have to play a lot of games, like a ton of games, just to build up your toolbox of ideas.
Yeah.
So that's like I call it,
and all that stuff. Yeah,
that's right. So I call that's step 0 to making a game. Is just play a lot of games. You need and games that you wouldn't otherwise play, even ones that are just totally different genre. Play Euro games, play war games. Even just read the rule books for games. You don't even have to play. Just read the rules guide. You need to have a huge variety of interesting ideas that you can just pluck from. So that's step 0. And then usually I'll have just an idea, and the idea might even come from a single sentence or a single picture, like a primary source, like a historical source. And I'll see that and go, that could be a game. It's like just that picture. That could be extrapolated into a game. And I can give you like 2 examples of this. Of the first one, where I got the idea for Werewolf, is I just heard some podcast, I can't remember which podcast it was, of someone saying, it's not like there were that many werewolves setting off IEDs in occupied Germany. And I've got IEDs, I know that term from Afghanistan and Iraq. Who are the werewolves? And so I Googled the werewolves, which are these Nazi insurgents. I knew nothing about them before. And I'm like, that's a game. No one's done it, that's a game. Just that one sentence. And then so from that idea, usually when you get the idea like that, within the first 24 hours, this is how I do it. I just get a bit of paper and I just write down just a million ideas, like a million things. I draw a rough map, I do a sketch, do little diagrams, and very often the bulk of your creative work is done very quickly from when you get the inspiration. You spend a day or a couple of days just scribbling together as much as you can and laying out the groundwork for the game. And that's the fun part, just tossing around the ideas, and it's literally just get a pencil and paper and just draw all over it and do a rough draft of what it's going to look like. And then the next step is you need to make a prototype. And this is the hard part. A prototype is like a practice version that you can actually play the game. So the initial idea and that first sketch on a bit of paper, that's the easy part. That's the really, really fun part. And then there's a much, much longer part, which is making a prototype. Now, I used to do this by actually drawing and printing out on physical paper, making a physical prototype. And I don't do that anymore, because when you're making a prototype and you're play testing it, so you're playing it over and over again and writing things down about how it works, the game goes through so many changes that you're constantly having to reprint or scribble over stuff. I just do all my playtesting digitally now, and this is going to sound very basic, and people who are better with technology than me are going to laugh at me, but I do all my game design in PowerPoint. I just use Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Word to write my rulebook in. And I play the game in PowerPoint. So just moving icons around, just moving bits around. Yeah. So you have a slide.
With coin games, you're going to have to play from different points of view. That has got to be I do solo gaming, and one thing I do like to do when I'm learning a game to teach other people is to play two characters, so I can kind of see it. So I've developed, you have to kind of, I'm in this frame of mind, then I'm in that frame of mind, I'm this frame
that's why I do that all the time.
That's what you're doing then. You're like, okay, from this point of view.
Playing multi-handed solo, multi-handed. So you're inhabiting different player positions, and the way you do it is just you go, right, all right, I am this player now. If I was this player, what would be the best move? And then you shift to go, I'm this player, what would be the best move of this player? The only thing that makes that hard is if you have hidden information, which most of my games don't have that much of, but there are some where if there's hidden cards that the other player can't see, you have to try and forget, or say, just go, I'll assume that I don't know what the other player has in their hand, even though I do know. I assume that I don't know, and then I'll make my decision based on that. But that's a perfectly valid way of playtesting. it's better to do playtesting with other people, but that's very hard to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're relying on somebody to take their time off of your idea.
Yes. Yes. So
especially
my
a prototype when it's going to be very rough.
Oh yeah, it's going to be garbage. Also, like when you make your first prototype, it's going to be trash. I know that even no matter how good your idea is, when you make the prototype and sit down to play it for the first time, almost immediately when you do the first turn of your first game, you're going to go, "This is trash. This doesn't work," and you're going to start tearing things up and go, "Nah, start again."
Yeah.
Or chop that, change that. And that's why I say to people, and this is the rule that I follow as well, I don't bring in other playtesters, or I don't even bring in other people to the process until I have playtested the game at least 20 times.
Okay.
So I'll make a prototype, I'll test it, and then as I'm playing that 20 times, I'm making adjustments as I go. Once I've done it 20 times, then I put the call out and go, anyone want to test this? And I do this on Twitter or X now, as it's called. And I say, I've got another game ready for playtesting, and then I usually have a lot of people will send me a direct message saying, "Yep, here's my email. Send me the game. I'll test it for you." And then they send me some feedback. And then once I've done that, over this whole process might take a couple of months. Once I've made my prototype, I've made my rulebook, I've tested it thoroughly, 20 or more times. I've had other people test it for me. I've made all those little adjustments, and other people spot spelling mistakes and typos. It was another reason to get other people to look at your stuff, because there's always mistakes. So that's part of it too.
Yeah.
And then once I've got that prototype polished up and I've got my rulebook, I've got all my files ready, then I pitch the game to publishers. So and this is just sending an email. So I'm not a publisher. I'm a designer. So So, and I'm not a graphic designer. So when I make my games, they don't look that pretty. They're pretty basic. Like I said, making Word and PowerPoint. But that's not my job. I'm just there to design the game. Mm-hmm. And so I'll then send the files to a publisher, and if they agree to it, they'll send me a contract, sign the contract, and that's agreement for royalties and timing and when the game's actually going to get made. And then I basically hand the files over to the publisher, and they will hire a graphic designer to make it look nice. They'll pretty it up. They'll send the files over to China to get it, printed in a factory. They'll handle the warehousing and the distribution.
Just to pause on that step, because the publisher is also going to play test it to make sure it's up to their thing. And are there producers and working with another, like an editor or another creative?
Yeah,
in the publisher sphere, or do you just take most of the brunt of the heavy lifting of making the game as best as it can be?
I do most of the heavy lifting. So when in the world of wargaming, which again is a sub niche within the board gaming world, when I say a wargame publisher, most of the time I mean one or two guys in their garage in the middle of Wisconsin or in Ohio or whatever. So these are not big companies. They don't have a secretary to answer the phone. It's just a guy, and it's like he's running it out of his shed. So some of them are big. I mean, some of them, some wargame publishers do have a big warehouse. They have an office with an address, and they have employees. They might have 10 or 20 employees. That's like some
GMT
of them.
Or Avalon Hill, if they're still around.
Yeah, I think, So GMT, Avalon Hill, like Phalanx, Compass. There's a few publishers that have got that are like an actual company, but a lot of the publishing companies are a very small operation. So sometimes if I send a game off to a publisher, no, they won't play test it, because they will assume that I've already done that. Okay. But if you're doing it at a more professional level with one of these bigger companies, yes, they will play test it, and they may even assign you a developer. So there's a developer. Design, developer is someone who takes a game that's half done and makes it actually done, and that's a different skill to a designer. A designer needs all the sort of creativity and coming up with the ideas, and a designer has to do a lot of the testing. But the developer is the one who actually makes it a product that can be sold. Yeah. So the developer is going to go through and go, right, the layout of your rulebook is confusing, move this here. The board, we need to move this. This needs to be reworded, all that kind of stuff. So, and if they find all your mistakes, they go, no, this doesn't match this. The wording of the rule doesn't match the wording on the card, all that kind of stuff. And that's hard work, and it's sort of fiddly work, and it's a different skill set to a designer. But having said that, I've had to do the development on my own games quite a lot, because a lot of publishers are not going to give you a developer. Or I've had the good fortune to have other people who just volunteer to be a developer for me because they really like the idea of the game, and they'll do the development. Because a lot of this it's a hobby. I mean, it's not like I say, the wargame industry. It's more of a hobby where a few of us make a little bit of money on the side. It's not really an industry. We're all doing this for fun, even though I know some like graphic designers in the wargame world who will just they'll volunteer to do the graphics for my game just for fun. Like, that's so good. It's so good. And you couldn't even imagine that in most other industries. Like, hey, people just like calling up and say, can I just work for you for free and make your product just because I like it? I just like the idea of it. So that's really good. And you get all these connections all over the world too. That's another thing I love. Like I'm always talking to guys in Poland or in Spain or in England or in America who are helping with graphics or helping with development, or I'm talking to publishers. And it's just a great little hobby to be in, because basically even the publishers, everyone's doing this because they just love it. That's no one's doing it for money. You don't even make that much money, so everyone's just doing it for the love of it. And I think a lot of industries start out that way. I think, say something like video games, a lot of video game companies started out as this small group of people with a lot of passion that just loved what they were doing. But then as it gets bigger and bigger, it becomes about the money, and then something of the magic dies, and they start producing lower quality products. And it's hard to recapture that initial like love for the product that you're making. The other industry that I've worked in that has an element of this is winemaking. So I used to work just selling wine, and winemakers are kind of like this, where they just love it. It's a lot of work, but just testing and blending and all that kind of stuff. Very similar to the board game world, where there's lots of people who will do it out of the love and the passion for it, and that's great. I love it.
Well, to counter that point, without dissuading you from having that opinion, there's also the military.
Yes,
who do it not just for the love of the game, but for the very principled reasons.
That's true.
What have you learned working with the military? How's that? I guess one way of phrasing the question, and there's so many ways you can go with this, but how has that honed your ability to make a solider game, or how has it influenced your game design working with military people?
Well, it's a lot in the sense that, so in some ways it's counterintuitive, but it's forced me to make a lot of my games simpler, because the military doesn't really like big, complicated games. Because a lot of the officers and soldiers are not going to spend 6 hours reading a rule book. They don't have time. So the game, they have to be able to pick up the rules immediately. And usually in the military, you have bespoke games. So you just make a game for a specific problem. Whereas in the commercial game world, you're making a game so that you can sell 1,000 copies of it, so that lots of people will play it over and over again. But in the military, you might design a whole game that is only going to be played once for a specific audience for a specific purpose.
Wow.
So they might say like, we're gonna run a war game on a hypothetical Chinese invasion of Taiwan. We need a game for that, and then you might make that or assist in making that. And it's played over a whole day, or maybe 3 days, or maybe over a week. But the game is not meant to be a commercial product. It's just meant to serve that purpose. And it has to be simple enough for people to pick up. So I've worked with other guys in the military that make games, and they've started out making big, complicated games with lots of dice and lots of charts and lots of detail. But then over time, we've just had to cut stuff out and simplify and simplify. And the tension in the military world is, the two most common bits of feedback I hear is, make the game simpler, because this is too hard. Like, our grunts, infantry guys are not going to read this. They're just not going to. Or the other kind of feedback you get is, you haven't represented insert my specialty here well enough. So you might have submarine guys who are like, you haven't depicted submarines accurately, or like Air Force guys are like, this is not how aircraft actually work. Or artillery guys, like, you can't fire that many fire missions in one day or whatever. So everyone is like either saying, make it simpler, but make my thing more detailed. And of course, there's ways around that, and that depends on the purpose of the game. So, what I'll usually say to in a military context is, the game has to have a very clear purpose, and it can't represent everything. It can't represent intelligence, logistics, command and control, battlefield tactics, all of that. Focus in on a couple of lessons that you want your officers to learn. And make the game focused on that.
So they're very specific or explicitly pedagogical tools. They're to learn.
Yes, they are to
about
learn.
certain parameters. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And they don't necessarily have to be fun, but it helps if they are fun, because that means people will actually play them. Whereas if it's really boring, you will lose. It's just the same as I'm a high school teacher. I teach kids. It's the same when I'm making a game for a classroom setting. Yes, it has to be educational, but it has to be fun enough for them to actually play it. Because if it's so boring, they just mentally switch off. They're not actually learning from it. So the game still has to have a certain bare minimum level of fun, as well as being educational. And it has to have a very easy user interface. And this is like even if you're not talking about computers, if you're talking about physical games, physical board games, all the information that the player needs to be very clearly laid out on the board, right? And you've got to give them like a sheet that says, on your turn, you'll be doing this, 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 in this order. This is what this word means, whatever. It's got all the information has to be very, very clear and upfront. And, and using like the color coding, this is the blue team, this is the red team, right? So team blue, it's your turn, and all their pieces are blue, and then all their pieces are red. So it's got to be as simple and as intuitive as possible. It's got to be a little bit fun, all of that, so that you can deliver the knowledge that you're trying to deliver, or achieve the learning outcome that you're trying to achieve. And because I make games for sort of three different audiences, so I'm either working on games for military, the games that I want to use in a high school setting, like to teach my students, or for a commercial setting where I want to make a game where I want to sell it, or I just make games for my own amusement, just that I'll play with myself or my friends. But in all four of those like audiences, there are some things in common, which is basically keep it simple, keep it intuitive, keep it fun, and narrow down the purpose and the focus of the game to what you can actually achieve. Cut out the bloat. And that's another expression in game design, is you're always trimming the fat. Right? So many designers, when they first get into it, will just make an enormous game with lots of subsystems and lots of complexity and lots of detail. And 90% of the time, the process of development or the process of design is cutting stuff out. It's very rare that you'll have to say to a designer, "Oh, you should add stuff in." They've usually got too much. Yeah. So you want to narrow it down to what the purpose of the game is. Now, to take an example of that, one of the games I'm designing right now is an attempt to cram the entire Reformation from 1517 to 1555 into a 1 hour game.
1 hour, okay.
Into a 1 hour game for 6 players.
Wait, does it start with the invention of the printing press?
No. That's something that I've just sort of abstracted out as well. But it would be like, so in that game, there's 6 factions, and each faction has a list of actions that they can take. So if you're like the Protestants in the Reformation, your list of actions are going to be like translate the Bible into one of 3 languages, English, French, German, preach, study, debate, recruit, because you might recruit armies to like fight the Catholic countries. And then if you're the Spanish or the Habsburg Empire, your list of actions might be trade, build, explore, like send ships to explore the New World. Persecute, like remove Protestants from within your empire. So you have a list of actions, and then the game works just you go around and everyone does 2 actions each turn, and because every faction has a list of like 10 different actions they could do,
and you get to choose 2. That's really interesting.
And you can choose 2. So your turn is just choose 2 actions from your list in front of you, and everyone has a different list of actions, and everyone and in that way you're cutting out a lot of detail, because the actions might be as simple as place a piece here, piece here, move this piece to there, and I try to keep it so that an action, any specific game action, should take about 30 seconds to physically resolve, which means you don't have to consult a chart, roll 2 dice, check the chart, then move a piece over here. It should just be any specific action you do is done in 30 seconds. And I also do this because attention spans are pretty short. People don't like waiting even 5 minutes for their turn to come around. So try and keep the turns quick, keep the actions quick, keep it flowing, and make it so that players can interrupt each other's turns sometimes as well. I do a lot of that in my designs, especially a game I made called 1 Hour World War II. That's out now. It's with Worthington Games. The whole premise of that is you're doing World War II in an hour, and you're constantly interacting with each other. If Germany builds armies, the Americans or the British can interrupt that and do strategic bombing, which hurts their economy. But it's all very quick actions to take, so that you're never waiting longer than a couple of minutes before you're doing something. And even when you're not doing something directly, you have to be engaged with the game, because the game state's changing all the time, and that affects you. So that's what that's the focus of a lot of my designs now, is essentially cramming in as much of that good player interaction into a short time, and making sure that no one is ever disengaged with the game, that everyone's constantly having to look at the board. Because and Axis and Allies is the opposite of this. Even this is ironic because this is the first game that really got me into board gaming. Axis and Allies is the total opposite. You will wait an hour for your turn. and that, for some reason, for the younger me, that was not a problem because the game was just so interesting and so good.
Yeah.
And you would talk while you were waiting.
Were you watching other people make their turn and planning?
Yeah, you're watching other people make their turn.
Can you plan during their turn? Or
you can.
But you're going to have to, there's going to be some flex because the game state's going to change by the time it comes to you.
That's right. Yeah, and that's one of the most frustrating things is if you play games with people and it's an hour between turns and it gets to their turn and they're like, I haven't thought about this yet. I still play like the global Axis and Allies are the one that your mate Daryl wants to play with you, and that's we can play that with up to like 8 players, and we'll do that a couple of times a year. Get a whole bunch of guys together. We spend the whole day playing it, but we set a limit of 6 hours for the game. So we're going to play for 6 hours. And we keep the turns moving. And if you're taking too long, everyone will say, "Hurry up, just do your turn," so that we're not just around there. So we always say, when it's not your turn, plan your turn. Just So that's one way around it. But it works for those kind of games to have that long wait. Sometimes that's an advantage because some games are what I would call an event game, which is it is a day of it. The game becomes the reason for a big social event. So an event game is one that will take 6 to 8 hours to play. You need multiple players. And there's a lot of downtime in between the turns because when it's not your turn, you might need to go get another beer from the fridge. You want to go chat to the other friend that you haven't seen in 2 years and whatever. So those event games, it's fine for them to have a lot of downtime because the purpose of the game is just to create this fun day. If you talk about a game that can be played in 2 hours or less, you're going to expect that people want to play that in an evening, probably on a weeknight, and they might have a small group. Maybe it might be like, me and my wife will invite over another couple, so there's 4 of us playing a game. We want to have that resolved within an hour and a half, and we want to have player interaction, and we want to have no downtime. So that's kind of the two. I could say there's probably 3 main types of games in this regard. You've got the big event games that take all day. You've got the social weeknight game night games, and then you might have solo 2 to 3 hour or 3 to 4 hour games, which you can play solo and you can leave set up or maybe play it over a couple of sessions. A lot of war games fall into that category. So 3 or 4 hours, and you're probably not going to play it with someone else because you're not going to find that many other people who are that interested in it. So a lot of war games are intended to be done solo. Some of them are deliberately only solo, but most games are going to fall into one of those 2 categories. Like it's a weeknight game night game or it's an event day game. So it should go for less than 2 hours or it should go for at least 6 hours. That's how most games should be. Yeah.
What are some of your favorite solo games? Or when you got into gaming, when did you break away from, competitive games to solo games? And solo games are competitive, but they're within your own wheelhouse.
I mean, I don't do a lot of solo games. I do some
you
games
design instead. You don't buy it, so I'll just make one. Yeah.
I just make, and I do make a few. Like my Division Commander game is basically a solo game. But I do play war games solo, but I just do multi-handed solo. Because a lot of war games, basically now, they're meant to be for 2 or more players, but they'll come with solitaire rules. And so you can
either
play against a bot.
Or,
Which is, I actually don't like it that much because handling a bot is usually a lot of work. It's either a flow chart or another deck
I'd rather
of
play
cards
2 players than me against a bot.
I'd rather just be both sides. Having said that, I do intend on making solitaire versions of a lot of my games, or at least including solo rules, because a lot of people prefer to play that way. I'm not really an expert on making solo versions. I'm getting better at it, but there are some designers who that is their wheelhouse, that they're really good at making solo games. And there was an explosion.
Turchi.
Yeah. There's been an explosion of those games since COVID because people were shutting their homes and they had to play on their own. So there's been a lot of them coming out. And I do want to get into more solo gaming, but because my approach is always about player interaction, I generally don't do solo. Yeah, because and the other thing is I don't do video games at all, or digital games or computer games. None. I haven't played any kind of digital games in, I don't know, 15 years at least.
Even digital board games? Because there's some...
No, I mean, digital board, yeah, I do my play testing. Sorry, I do play testing digitally, but no, I don't even do digital board games, like on Board Game Arena or Vassal or Tabletop Simulator. I don't really do those because the reason I want to play board games is to have the social interaction and have and to talk to people. So that's... And I also noticed that video games were just too addictive and you can just sink so many hours into them, and I don't have that much time to spare on them. And because I want to make my own designs, any spare most of the spare time that I have that is dedicated to gaming is dedicated to design work and not to playing games anymore. So that's what I'm doing mostly with my gaming time, is just design. So yeah, that's been my approach now. But I do need to branch off and make some more solo games. I think it would be a good idea.
We covered your work with the military and how that's influenced your game design. What about high school? What have you learned working with that age group? And there's this word that keeps on coming up. It's kind of a bad thing to try to define, but I just want to try to define it. And you're defining it in all these different contexts. Fun. So I'm sure fun, it means one thing when you're talking about a game that you're going to sell, one thing when you're talking about military, and one thing we're talking about high school. So what is working with high schoolers taught you about game design and taught you about human attention span, whatever this fun thing is?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's hard to define fun. It's kind of a subjective thing. I guess, let me think about this for a second. Like a way you can understand games is they're kind of like a bit of performance art. It's kind of like if you go to a theater and watch a play, it's kind of like that, but you're one of the characters in the play. It's kind of like that. So you're creating
there's improv and there's a script, and you're working within parameters. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
And there's things that facilitate your imagination, like the art and the setting and the theme.
Yes.
And then the mechanics, to some degree, kind of grab your attention and bring you into the play. Yeah.
And that's like RPGs are the best examples. I don't play RPGs, but I borrow a lot of RPG ideas for my games. And RPGs just make it explicit that the purpose of the game is for you and the other players to enter into this imaginary world and inhabit that world. And it's I guess it's a form of escapism that sometimes gets people will say that games are escapist, in that people just want to escape reality and live in this fantasy world. I don't think that's a fair accusation. I think the real like escapism that most people are engaged in is just mindlessly scrolling a phone now. You're escaping reality in that way, but you're doing it in a way that's not actually that fun and not actually that enlightening. But a game that you're playing together is you're participating in a shared imaginary world, right? So and because my love of gaming is so linked to my love of history, like I basically just make historical games. And so I can't really speak to the fantasy or the sci-fi side of things, so I guess it's similar. Is as in I will make a historical game because I want to inhabit a time period in history in some way. I want to step into the shoes of someone from the past, because I want to experience a world that is very, very different to mine. That would be at the most zoomed out level, you could say. So the purpose of the game is, and the definition, I guess, of fun is inhabiting this imagined space, and competition, I guess, is part of it as well. You want to be competing. You want to win. Winning is fun, but that's not the most important thing at all. I don't care if I win or lose. I just want to have this shared experience and enter into it like a different world. That's kind of what, and that's why a lot of game designers are also very good at world building, because game design is world building. That's what it is. You're building a world that has its own parameters and its own rules and its own set of interactions and so on. But in terms of like high school setting for kids, is I have learned a lot. A lot of the games that I've made are directly inspired by games that I made just for classroom use. Like this one I'm working on now on the Reformation. I made that as a classroom game, and then now I'm going to get it published. And what I learned from that is, attention span is just ridiculously short for high school students. And that's why the turns have to be like, it's your turn. Yeah. You got 10 seconds. Right now, it's your turn. Now it's your turn. It's got to be kept moving. Has to be simple and having bold colors that really stand out and make it obvious what's going on. But I found another good thing is just to have a bit of paper in front of the players that say this is what you do when it's your turn. Because this is the big question when you're designing a game, you're getting other people to play it, is players will say to you, right, it's my turn, what do I do?
Yeah.
And a lot of designers, it's not clear in the rule book how that actually works. Because you might say this is how this works, this is how this works. But if the player is going to ask you, right, it's my turn, what do I do? That you should be able to answer that in one sentence. It should be look at the list of things in front of you and choose one. Yeah. Or in like old fashioned games like Snakes and Ladders, like it's your turn, roll a dice and
roll
move
a dice.
Yeah. Yep. Or in a worker placement Euro game, pick up a worker, put it somewhere on the map and do what it says on the map.
Yeah.
So that's what we call the core gameplay loop. Like, what are you actually doing each turn?
Yeah.
For high school kids, has to be as simple as possible. And if you think it's simple enough, no, make it simpler. Not to a babyish level or anything, but it's got to be as simple as you can possibly make it, while still conveying the lesson you want to convey.
Yeah, and also manipulating the game state, like what you do on your turn changes what's happening in the game.
Yes,
that's got to be a lever.
That's right. They have to be able to see that their decision is a meaningful decision. Yeah. So they go, I've done this action. I can't see that the game state has changed in any way. I'm going to tune out. So and this is why war games are really good in a classroom setting. War games are the best because they're attacking each other, and that's very and this is why I don't use a lot of like Euro games where they're just building their own little engine. I've tried doing that, and it's not as fun, especially for boys. Boys want to attack each other. They want to go like, I am attacking you. And see it happen on the board. So that's another way to keep it engaging and making the attacking part, the part where you destroy other people's pieces, that has to be really simple and straightforward, and you have to be able to see the result happen immediately. So it's not like.
Well, what do you do about defense or somebody feeling bad about losing?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Do you mitigate
that is an issue.
Or
yeah.
So that is an issue.
Yeah, so the way that I run games in a classroom setting is it's kind of like if you have an RPG, there's a game master and then there's a bunch of players. And the game master is running the game and often manipulating the game slightly.
To keep the game going.
To keep the game going and to keep it balanced, keep it fair, keep it fun. So if you're the teacher and you're running a classroom game, you are the game master. You can tweak things. If you see that there's a team of very quiet, timid girls who are commanding a country in a war game, and all the other people are attacking them, and they're getting very sad because they didn't want to fight anyone, and then all the boys are like, let's attack them. You can say like, I'm going to give this team a little bit of a boost. I'm going to give them And then if the kids question you just say, well, I know the history, you don't. This is the thing that happened. So you just come up with some justification. Like I played a World War II game, and the Allies weren't doing so well, and so it was because the Allied players were just not on the ball. They didn't really know what to do. So when it was the American players' turn, like, right, America, you just got a whole bunch of free armies and ships on the board. And like, oh, that's not fair, sir. Why did the Americans get all that stuff? I go, well, this is World War II, and roughly we're in 1943, 1944. By this time, the American economy's ramped up, so they get a whole bunch of free stuff.
Yeah,
so you just come up with a reason on the fly and go, there, that's
Yeah,
and then so you can just adjust things, and then in that case, that American team was like, yeah, we got a whole bunch of stuff. Now we can go out there and take over some places. So
then they're reinvested in the game, so it keeps on going.
Yes, so that's what you're trying to do is like I said, it's like a performance piece that we're all participating in. We're all players in it, and you're just trying to as the game facilitator, you're just trying to keep that going and keep everyone interested. And try and hopefully achieve some kind of learning outcome, which usually you do. Like even if it's something as simple as we're playing a World War I game, and at least by the end of it, the students have learnt that World War I had Germany and Austria and the Ottoman Empire against Britain, France, Russia. Like at least they know which side the countries are on because they've seen it on a map. Yeah. That's a learning outcome. Because if the kids were just writing notes in their book, they don't know what the Ottoman Empire is. They don't know. Unless there's a map. And that's another thing that's really good for it is war games are probably the best thing for teaching geography. You want to learn. This is why if I meet someone and they happen to have encyclopedic knowledge of every town and river in Belgium, I'm guessing they're a wargamer. Or if they know,
Probably.
or if they know, where the Dnieper and the Danube rivers are, or they know, where Budapest is in relation to Vienna, you can probably assume they've played a lot of war games. It's because that's how you learn geography. And in fact, this is a little fun fact about geography as a subject. It only started being taught in schools in France, and it was only done for military reasons so that people would know where forts are and where defensible lines are and where rivers are. So geography as a subject was really just meant for military officers, especially artillery officers and those involved in building forts. They had to know the geography and the lay of the land of where to build the best fort. So as another use of games for education, you want to teach kids how to know a world map intuitively, have them play a war game.
Yeah. I'm sure we could come up with, or somebody could write a pamphlet or a book or an extended article on the pedagogical benefit of games, war games. Like, what do you learn when you're teaching a game to a student? There's probably like a homeschool market for games that somebody probably hasn't tapped into, but calculation, diplomacy, geography, historical facts, all this stuff. But what has gaming taught you about humanity and the world? Like, what has it taught you about what we are?
That's a big question. What has it taught me about humanity? I think, first of all, everyone likes games. Everyone likes games. Most of what we do in our spare time is something like a game. So chances are a typical person you meet is probably going to be into sports. Sport is a game. It's the same thing. Right? And there is overlap. There's a lot of guys that are really into wargaming and they really like watching hockey or they like watching football or whatever. So, or people are really into playing little games on their phone, or they're into computer games or video games. Patterns, and then even other, that's right. And that's, if you look at what most people now are spending their leisure time doing, a lot of it is games. And has been for a long time. You think about just old people playing cards or playing checkers or playing chess. So games have always been, I think, probably the main leisure activity for most humans. I think that's what we like doing.
There's a technical term for this called homo ludens, or the playing
homo ludens.
animal.
Yes. A human is one who plays, a man who plays. And I think that's true. And you can also see games as I'll slide into religious stuff a little bit here.
Oh, please do.
But a game is one of those few activities that is done for its own sake. So it's like you go to work and you're working in order to get money, in order to pay for this. Or you go to the gym and exercise. You're doing that activity not because you like that activity. It's in order to get to the goal of this other thing. Games are one of the few activities where you're playing it for the sake of the game. It's one of those few self-contained, just good activities to do. And a comparison, which is going to be slightly blasphemous maybe, is if you go to a Catholic or an Orthodox liturgy. I know I'm stretching a long bow here. The liturgy, the church service, the worship is also an activity done for its own sake. And in a similar way, it's a little bit silly. You put on the fancy clothes and you have candles and things are done in a certain ritualized way. In the same way the board games have a kind of bit of a play acting or a bit of a LARPing element, I guess, where you're inhabiting a certain role. But it's still play. It's still just something done for its own sake and not as an activity directed outwards to something else. It's not work. That's what I mean. Most of the other activities we're doing are work in some sense, whereas games and religious worship are not. They are done for the sake of the activity itself. And I know that it's I am drawing a very long bow here, but I think that's basically right. That most of our leisure activity is games and always has been, and it's because games are fun. Why are they fun? Because you're entering a little shared world where you're enacting a role and you're playing. You're being something that you're not, and you're just doing it for the sake of the activity. You want to be caught up in that moment and just be inhabiting that little world. So that's something that it's taught me, is that everyone likes games. I think that's a good takeaway. Everyone likes games. And if you meet someone that doesn't like games, it's because they haven't played the right game yet. And I think that's true of board games too. I think everyone is a potential board game enthusiast if they play the right game. And I think that the market for games is going to keep getting bigger and bigger, because there's so many people that if you say the word board games, they'll think of Monopoly or Snakes and Ladders, and they go, that's something that kids do.
I think
but
that's
then if you show them,
decreasing, but
I think it's decreasing too.
Yeah.
I think and a lot of those people, if you show them Settlers of Catan and they've never played Settlers of Catan before, I've seen so many people play that for the first time and go, whoa, I had no idea a game could be like this. Or another example would be like some friends of mine that are really into soccer. They love soccer. That's their whole life. But then we played a game of Merchants and Marauders with them, which is a pirate game, very detailed pirate game where you're moving out a ship and you're attacking each other and getting cargo and selling it. And they played this pirate game and they're like, that was incredible, I'm buying it. And they went and bought the game the next day, and then now they've got a board game collection, of like 100 games.
Watch out for
that. So it's anyone can be into it. And the variety of games now is so, there's 5,000 new games made every year, something ridiculous like that. And the variety and the quality.
2 of them are yours every single year.
Yeah, that's right. So, and that's more people being brought into the hobby. So, like, I'm a big evangelist for the board gaming hobby. I'm always trying to get more people to come into it, because it's also just such a wholesome activity to do. It's like it's one of those activities that's not, drinking and gambling and smoking and I don't know. It's a wholesome, G-rated family activity that everyone can get in on, and it's not that expensive. Unless your collection can blow out. Like I've spent a lot of money on games, but you really don't have to. And you compare it to other hobbies, like, I don't know, think of another hobby like camping or shooting or hunting or golf or going to the theater. Board games are pretty cheap compared to all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a good hobby. What
have board games taught you about war?
Ooh.
And not just like the logistics, but the inevitability, the philosophy behind it, the necessity of it, I guess the inevitability of it, or what it is about human beings that, we play games, but we also murder each other. And we also compete on massive scales with huge risk. I don't know. Riff on that if you have any thoughts on that.
That is a very good question. I do have a lot of thoughts on war and what war is and why it is just perennially out there. There's the old term from Clausewitz, which a lot of your listeners would probably know already, which is that war is the continuation of politics by other means.
Or politics is the continuation of war by other means.
Yes, and same. It's on a spectrum. So, So if you imagine, here's how I frame it. Politics is the struggle for power. I'll say that. Politics means the struggle for power. And if the rules of politics are set up such that can be done peacefully, then it will be done peacefully. But very, very often those rules break down. And those rules can break down within a nation or between nations. And when those rules for the peaceful resolution of politics break down, that's where you get war. And also because I keep going back to this definition, the state is the one institution that has a monopoly on violence in a given territory. You need to understand why war exists, and there must be a state. Like I'm very much like a Westphalian, Hobbesian view of the state. The state is inevitable. There's going to be a state, and also the state, along with the family and the church, is one of the 3 institutions that is explicitly mentioned in Scripture as being ordained by God. So, regardless of your religious persuasion, historically, human beings have organized themselves into family, church, and state, and they're always going to be with us. Now, the state being the one institution that has the monopoly on violence means that, first of all, within a nation, there is always going to be competition for the power of the state, because a monopoly on violence is the highest form of power that you can have in a state, in a nation. So there's always going to be competition to seize control of the state. And that is what a civil war is. That is what an insurgency is. It's one group in the society wanting to seize the state, because holding the state means you can punish your enemies and reward your friends.
Yeah,
which is the old sort of Roman theory of patronage in politics, which is the purpose of winning any kind of political victory is to reward friends and punish enemies.
That's not just a Nazi idea. That's been around.
No, it's not. That idea did not
originate
originate with Carl Schmitt. That is a very old Roman idea. The friend-enemy distinction. It's not just a Schmittian term. It's used. It's just basically how all humans have seen. It's tribalism. It's tribal politics, which is the norm in all of human history. Is that I have my group and you have your group. Even if we agree on 99% of theology or philosophy or whatever, you're still an enemy because I want the state and you want the state, and we both can't have it at the same time, so we're going to compete for control of the state. So that's what war is. That's what a civil war or an insurgency is. And then, of course, a war between states is the same thing, just kicked up to a higher scale, which is two states might want to hold the monopoly of violence within a given territory, and that might overlap. And you can often settle that peacefully. I don't think war is inevitable. I think it's always possible for states to resolve things peacefully. And that's particularly in Europe. We had very detailed international law before the United Nations. We had, the Treaty of Westphalia has very clear stipulations about what a state is, what sovereignty is, what rights are due to a sovereign, and so on. But that system can't always work. There are going to be disagreements that can't be resolved peacefully. And this is why, this is another little historical anecdote, that Louis XIV on his cannonballs would have the last argument of kings or something like that. So it's like the cannonballs are the final argument of the sovereign. If the sovereign within a state is talking to another sovereign and they can't agree, then war results, because that is the final way of settling a dispute. And it's going to happen because every state, by definition, has a monopoly on violence. Every state has the capacity for violence. If it doesn't have the capacity for violence, it's not a state and it will be taken over. That's right. So because humans are inevitably going to form themselves into a community that has one institution with a monopoly on violence, and that's inevitable, there's going to be humans whose job it is to mete out violence. So militaries are inevitable, states are inevitable. And if you have a military, if you have a state, which is really kind of the same thing, a state has to have a military, and a military will become the state if there is no state. The military just becomes the state. Because that's going to exist, war is going to exist. Because it's like if you and I are in a room and there's a gun on the table, one of us is going to pick it up. We could both not pick it up for a long time. We could both choose to not pick it up, but eventually someone's going to pick it up. And I know that's kind of a pessimistic view of human nature, but I do think it's just inevitable that we're going to compete, simply because resources are not infinite. Resources are not infinite. There will be competition for resources, therefore war will enter into the equation. And what games can teach you about that is, I think they're really good at teaching you about decision making, how you make decisions, and how you have to think of a clear purpose and then make decisions that align with the purpose. And what's fascinating to me is all the wars in history, that they're all quite different. They're not all just competing for wealth or land or power. They're not really entirely about that. Like, I hear this common accusation that the Crusaders in the First Crusade only went to retake Jerusalem in the hope of getting more wealthy and seizing land. No, it's not why they did that. They were bankrupt doing that, or to say that, like, even Hitler's argument that he's invading Poland and the Soviet Union for living space because there's not enough room in Germany. No, not really. It's not this. It's not really about that. It's not always just the expansion of land and wealth. There are lots of reasons that humans will go to war. And one of them is honor, is the honor of the state. And that's something that is often forgotten and that's how a lot of nations around the world still view it, is that your reputation as a nation depends on your victories on the battlefield and on your conduct in war. It's not just about the land and the wealth and the power. It's about your reputation. And this is, I think, that's why a lot of ancient wars are fought, and in the more primitive parts of the world, that's why wars are fought, is to maintain honor. And that's not a silly idea either, because maintaining your reputation in a lot of the world, in a lot of history, that is worth way more than any amount of money. To have the reputation as a strong nation, as a strong state, and this is why one of the things that military history is one of those fields of history that still has such a direct impact on decision making now, because there are if you go to the USA and go to a military base, you might go into the headquarters of the 101st Airborne Division or whatever, or the 1st Armored Division. These divisions are organizations that have a history going back over 100 years, who have earned a reputation. They remember what they did. They remember what the people in that division did in World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. They have a reputation, and that is very valuable. And that reputation both inspires the men in those units to live up to the reputation, and it causes, hopefully, fear on the parts of their enemies.
It's a deterrent to war.
Which is a deterrent to war, which is, and that's one of the best arguments in favor of having a very strong U.S. military, simply as a deterrent. Even if you never use it, it's just there, because the U.S. has had a reputation for being a strong nation that can win wars. It can, it makes a lot of mistakes, but it has that capacity to do that. And likewise, you might go to war because you've made a promise to another nation to defend them. And they invoke that agreement and say, well, you said you would defend us, right? Yeah. We'll defend you for our reputation, so that we will have honor among nations. And I think that's a lot of the reason why Australia fights.
There's another aspect to it, and this is way beyond my capacity to really comprehend, but without, you were talking about the state and you're talking about military, and how they're not synonymous, but a military is going to have a state and a state's going to have a military. But the other purpose of a state is currency. Yes. So war backs up that violence. The state's monopoly on violence is actually it's not contained within violence. It's actually contained within money. In a way, I don't know. I'm just riffing on this, but it has very important economic consequences.
It does. It does.
Not just creating, not just the war machine or the military-industrial complex, but like the fiat currency. It's right in the name, fiat currency. It's the ability to say, no, this means something, or else I'm going to throw you in prison if you mess around with this little piece of paper, kind of thing.
That's right. And that's why traditionally the purpose of a state is simply maintain law and order, defend the nation from external threats, and maintain a stable currency. That's essentially the job of a state for most of history. Before say the modern welfare state, the state just has a very simple list of jobs, and it just does those. And to the extent it does those jobs well, it is a good state. And even the word statistics comes from the study of the state. That's
really?
That's what it means. Like the 18th century Prussians started the field of statistics because, Frederick the Great wanted to know exactly how many peasants were in Prussia so that how many soldiers that they could raise and so on. But in terms of the economic aspect of it, I read there's a very good line in a book called Renaissance Diplomacy by Gareth Mattingly. This is a classic text published, I think, in the 1950s. And it's the seminal work on diplomacy in the 16th century. And he says, he's writing this description of the French marching into Italy to fight the Habsburgs, in like the 1520s. And he says, there's much speculation that the wars of this time are driven by commerce and by trade and so on. But he says, but no, it would be a long time before monarchs would wage war on behalf of merchants. So he's saying that in the medieval period and the Renaissance period, no, you don't have merchants dragging the king into wars. The king fights wars for the sake of honor, for the sake of expanding land and power, but not necessarily for money. Now, later on, you do have wars fought over trade and over the flow of currency, that does become a real thing. I think that is one of the marks of the modern period.
Yeah.
I think like modern in the broader sense, like since the French Revolution, or even if you want to say like the early modern period is since the Reformation. The modern period includes wars over trade, whereas you don't really see that in the ancient medieval world. Not really. Whereas in the 18th century, you do have colonists from Britain in North America clashing with French colonists over the fur trade, and that because the fur trade is worth a lot of money, and then because those merchants and settlers and colonists are clashing over this valuable trade out on a frontier, the state gets dragged in because the state's revenues are dependent on tax income from that trade. So that's usually the flow chart of how it works. Is that the state will derive its income from taxes on trade, and as a side point, that's historically how most states have funded themselves, is through tax on trade, not an income tax on their own people. It's taxes on trade and your import duties and so on. So that's where, the Royal Navy in the 19th century is basically funded by the trade in tea or in opium. That's what funds the Navy. So when something threatens trade, it is threatening the state's revenue. So the state will sometimes have to step in to defend trade routes and trade. And you do have, I think that's partially why the 7 Years' War was fought. It's essentially a war over trade and over economic dominance. But and also war does spur on economics, because war sharpens the mind of decision makers in the state and forces them to make the nation more efficient.
They start min-maxing the state. Yeah,
min-maxing the state. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think that's part of the reason why Britain had become such a powerful empire in the early 19th century, is it had been fighting wars against France for more than a century, and it's a state that is constantly on a war footing. It's constantly having to raise money, organize men. That's why you develop a bureaucracy, is to make sure soldiers are in the right place at the right time. War is the health of the state. That's another Renaissance saying. War is the health of the state, and the war is like, it sharpens the state and it makes it more powerful and more efficient. And then that applies to economics as well, which is that a state it's sort of forced to invest in the kind of research and development to win the war, and then as a side benefit of all that research and development in new technology, the economy improves. This is another little fascinating.
It unlocks more Euro game space for the traders to play their games.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's this other little fascinating anecdote that I can't remember where I read it, but it's like the Royal Society, which is the society dedicated to science in the 17th century. It's like the first scientific institute in the world, and it's the English government commissions the Royal Society, and the argument that these scientists are giving to the government is, if you give us money and let us tinker around with physics and chemistry and do this little nerd stuff that we like doing, as a side benefit of that, we can make better cannons for you to fight the French.
Yeah.
And that's basically this is why science gets funded by the state, is because, yes, you nerds are going to be off doing your little calculations, but as a side effect of that, we're going to get better weapons at some point down the line. And I think this is also the case of the Cold War is the reason you have GPS, in your phone. That's why. It's a missile guidance system. That's what it was originally meant for. And then as a side benefit, it becomes a consumer good that we can all benefit from. So there is that economic aspect to it, and maintaining the currency too. That's another interesting one. Yes, the function of a state is to maintain a currency, and that a war can put a strain on that. Like Frederick the Great in the 7 Years' War had to degrade his currency, had to shave the edges off the coins and melt them down to make more coins, and that was a bad thing to do, because that's obviously going to inflate the currency. So war can also have a detrimental effect on that function of the state. It can empty the state's coffers and force it to inflate its currency. So it does go both ways. War can stimulate the state to more economic efficiency, but it can also cause the state to become bankrupt. And I think especially now, like modern wars, a real modern war, if we were to fight a peer-to-peer war, is going to be so costly it will bankrupt any state that embarks on it, just because of the cost of our weapon systems are so high. And we would burn through billions of dollars in missiles in an hour. That's also why I think, by the way, that a lot of the hype about missiles and high-tech weapon systems, they're not going to be all they lived up to be, because they're so expensive, and you're going to fire them off in the first hour of the war, and then you're going to have to get back to infantry, drones, tanks, that kind of stuff. Because the hype, you just can't afford to just be pumping out. The same as like aircraft carriers. You can't just afford to keep pumping out aircraft carriers. They're just not worth it. They're going to get sunk. It's going to be returning to, as it's always been. I think that infantry is the most important component of any military force. Infantry wins wars, like boots on the ground. I think that is becoming clear in the Ukraine war and the Gaza war, is that to win a war, you need to physically occupy territory.
Debacle.
Or the Afghanistan. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. And that was, I was making my game Werewolf around about the same time. So that's my game about insurgency in Germany, around about the same time that Biden was pulling the troops out of Afghanistan. And I remember the contrast.
So you developed that whole game in 2 weeks?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Look, it was going through the final polishing stages at that point. But I was reflecting on the contrast between how the US handled the occupation of Germany versus how it handled the occupation of Afghanistan. So, I've said this before, that the most successful counterinsurgency that America has ever fought is Germany. And you don't think of that as a counterinsurgency because it was so successful that you don't even know about the counterinsurgent methods they had to use. Because when they went in there, the prediction was that there were somewhere between 2 and 6 million Nazis who are now out of military uniform. They're not wearing their SS uniform anymore, but they've blended back into the civilian population. And at any moment, we've got US troops occupying Germany, there's going to be bombs going off. They're going to have snipers in the roofs. They're going to be poisoning the water. They're going to be, setting up wires for our jeeps to crash on this. They told American soldiers, do not look Germans in the eye. Do not laugh with them. Do not shake their hand. Do not go down dark streets at night. Don't go into German bars and cafes on your own, because we are facing a hostile population that's going to rise up against us. Now, that part of the history is just almost never remarked upon. The reason you don't hear about it is because US allied counterinsurgency methods were very effective, and because the Nazi insurgency never materialized because the Germans hadn't planned for it and they didn't have any intention to wage an insurgency. And also the German population was just sick of war and they wanted to give up. But you can see a determined insurgency like in Afghanistan. All the insurgents have to do is just wait it out. If they can just still be a fighting force in existence and just wait it out, then the superpower might eventually leave and then you get your country back. So the Taliban did what the Nazis could not do. The Taliban got their country back because they maintained an insurgent fighting force over a long enough time and didn't agree to any kind of surrender terms. They kept sort of in the fight, and then eventually they win because the country occupying them decides it's not worth it. Now, the US also didn't pull out of Germany because Germany's so valuable. It's like a very important country to control. It's like still the third or fourth largest economy.
And we had, and then the Cold War too, with Stalin.
And the Cold War, you have to have boots on the ground there.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. But yeah, if you study that, what happened in occupied Germany after the war, how the German population was treated, I mean, it's not nice. I mean, if you did that in Afghanistan, the media would lose their minds over it. Like if
we don't have the stomach for that level.
We don't have the stomach for it. Like how the Americans denazified Germany compared to how they de-Talibanized Afghanistan, or how they got rid of Al Qaeda in Iraq. No, we don't have the stomach for a denazification program, because it was literally like, and the Soviets are even worse too. That's another thing. Another little side note, that when the Soviets came in, they just reopened basically the same concentration camps. Like they said, all right, we've liberated the Jews from places like Auschwitz. Now we're just going to put German political prisoners in those same camps. And the Americans had camps too. They had work camps on the Rhine where they were putting ex-SS guys in their millions. And they had very, very, very strict rules. They were doing book burning. Nazi books. You know, it was a total regime change. It was very swift. It was very effective. Completely merciless.
Well, and it was paired with the Marshall Plan, so they also flooded the country with money. So there was a carrot and a stick.
Yes, that's right. So it's like the Americans have come into Germany and they've won decisively and totally, and they do not tolerate Nazism at all. You can't even be, the hint of a whiff of Nazism about you. None of that's tolerated, and they're going to rebuild the country for you. So those two things, that the Marshall Plan and denazification together, formed the most successful counterinsurgency in U.S. history, I think. And but it's not studied as a counterinsurgency. It's like the war ended in 1945, and then it goes to the Cold War. But no, the occupation of Germany is a distinct episode in U.S. military history that can and should be studied to give us insights onto how to wage other counterinsurgencies.
Yeah, we didn't do that with the natives when America took over the continent. There was a different, but that would be the only other counterinsurgency in American history, even though it's not technically. Yeah,
or the Philippines, I guess. There was a rebellion in the Philippines in like the 1890s, I think. So there's yes, I guess you could say the conquest of the North American continent is kind of like a counterinsurgency against the natives. You could sort of see it that way as well. I mean, that's probably another subject that could be a game as well, like an insurgency from the point of view of Native Americans against the US. That would be there are some games that delve into that. Like there's one called Plains Indian Wars, which is mainly about like the Sioux and all the tribes in the like in the Midwest, I guess, and then the US settlers coming westward and taking the land and so on. But that is another time period that you could feasibly make maybe even a coin game about that. Maybe just zoomed in on one state like this, the Comanche in Texas.
Yeah, there's so much territory, it would be impossible to make
you can't do the
game
whole
about
US.
The entire,
but if you zoomed in on one state, maybe you could do something like that.
Oklahoma or something like that. So I gotta wrap up, go feed my wife, and but this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Kind of last question or topic: what have games taught you about yourself?
I've learned that I really, really like games. I don't know why, I just have an obsession with them. But
you don't mind winning. But you're not
mind winning.
I
don't really care that much about winning. No, I guess they've taught me that I just want to create a fun shared space that I can interact with other people in. That's what I want. That's kind of what I want to do in life, is to create the little world in which people can interact with each other. And it's taught me, making games has shown me as well. I guess it's shown me how hard it is to make a product. It's given me so much more respect for people that run a business and that are in the market economy and putting all of their life and their effort into something that they hope is going to take off. Like I still have a day job and doing this as a side thing, but it's given me so much more respect for people that run a business. Because it is just so hard to get things done, just the logistics of getting stuff done. That's not so much the game design. The game design part is fine. I'm talking about the production side of things. I have an idea for a game, making that into a reality. That is so many more steps than you could imagine. That it's given me more appreciation for those who work in the free market economy. Because as a teacher, I'm kind of insulated from that a little bit. So it's taught me that. You should
shop one of your simpler ideas to Jamie Stegmaier, I think he is. He's the Snowmeyer.
Yeah, I know. I know.
He wants a very simple games, and you're honing in on like an intersection of the war game to the kind of more popular game. You're gonna figure out like this magic little.
Yeah, I hope so.
Keep on going where you're going, and then
my problem is the games that I want to make are all got these obscure historical themes that that don't really have mass market appeal. And Jamie, I know he doesn't want to do any more historical themed games. That's what he does.
There's politics involved in that and stuff. But you just throw a coat of paint on it. I don't know, because it's really about the system.
Yeah, it is.
Has designing and playing games taught you about how to read people, how to detect bullshit, and how to understand the political like manipulations, propaganda, the stuff that's going on in the world?
Yeah, I think especially the Coin series and any games to do with politics and war has me thinking in terms of factions and their goals. So that's how I kind of analyze most political situations, whether domestic or international, is that a faction is a group of humans trying to achieve a goal, right? And so factions are everywhere. All of us are part of different factions, and factions have to work with other factions to achieve part of their goal, and they will be willing to compromise on some of it to get other parts, and they'll be willing to work with some groups and not others depending on their shared goals. So that's kind of how I see a lot of interactions and politics in the world is trying to identify who is this person's faction, what is their goal. Say, to take like the example of, say, in American politics for your audience, like the US right wing now is composed of not one faction, it's multiple factions, and they have some shared goals. Like, you've got say traditional Catholics, you've got Musk type,
the
Silicon
tech bros.
Valley tech bros. You've got libertarians. You've got foreign policy hawks, or guys that defense guys who want to make the military stronger. And you've got just people who are socially conservative but not necessarily religious. So say you've got like 4 or 5 different factions who are all just working together out of convenience, but at any time one of those factions could split away if that coalition is not achieving their goal. And the left would be the same. The left has got factions, and each faction has their own goal, and they're willing to work together temporarily to achieve that goal. And I think that if you analyze it in those terms, as multiple factions that happen to be making an alliance of convenience at this time to try and achieve a goal, that makes so much more sense of just any kind of political situation, as long as you can identify who the factions are. And that's what, there's a lot of that gets very murky, but you identify it based on what is their goal, what is that they are trying to achieve, and one of the things that those different groups all have in common, from say religious conservatives, libertarians, and the tech bros, is basically they sort of want the government to leave them alone. That's partially what they want, but they also want the government to be strong and enforce law and order and make sure that there's no crime. So they all have a rough shared goal of like a government's going to be smaller and just enforce the law as it's written. But if one of those factions decides that their interests would be better met with another constellation of factions, then they'll shift over. And the same. And if you play lots of coin games or games that are like the coin series, any kind of multiplayer, asymmetric sort of political type games, you'll start seeing in those terms. I'm willing to work with you because we temporarily have a shared goal in defeating this other guy. But as soon as that shared goal is reached, we're going to split apart and form a different constellation because we no longer have overlapping goals anymore. So it's like at the end of World War II, you've got America and Soviets were on the same team because they're fighting the Nazis. As soon as the Nazis are defeated, they're enemies because they had a shared goal. Shared goal was achieved. So now the factions realign. And that just explains so much. That's just such a useful lens to see the world in. I never saw the world in that lens until I started playing those kind of games, and now it makes things make a lot more sense.
Well, a lot more sense. I could see how that way of viewing the complexity leads you to being less either cynical, black-pilled, or just out of sorts. Like, so surprised because now everything's different. Because you thought it was the playing field was really simple, and now it's constantly being intruded by complexity. But because there's all these other factions going on, you can kind of you could look at the board state because you have the recognition that there is this board state that's not being collapsed.
That's right. And there is a game that came out recently called 2040, an American Insurgency. I think that's what it's called. And it's like a hypothetical game about what if America devolves into civil war in like the year 2040. And the guy that made it was he was trying to keep it sort of neutral and kind of agnostic, I guess, where he didn't say, it's Republicans and Democrats. He said it's like a blue team and a red team, and it could be that the blue team controls the government, or it could be that the red team controls the government. And so he just made it sort of vague on what the details were, because he was just trying to show how an insurgency would play out in the US. And that's a fascinating little thought experiment of like just for your don't have your partisan lens on, just look at it as if you were a foreigner. Like I'm not American, so I look at American politics as at a distance. And the same with the politics of any other country or the history of any other country. If you look at it from a distance, you can see it more clearly. There's this goal that wants to achieve this, and this goal wants to achieve this. This is why they're in conflict. So it doesn't become necessarily a sort of a moralistic, not necessarily good versus evil, and like there's our team and their team, and we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. It's more like there's a bunch of factions, and they all have a different goal. And then if you know what those goals are, you can see why the factions have lined up the way they have. Yeah. So I think that's all I have to say on that topic.
What would be if you're recommending two games, two very different kinds of games? One gateway game to bring to like you have some teenager, you want to have your wife or friends. Like what's a really good one of your favorite gateway games? Like easy to pick up. Really teaches somebody that doesn't know anything about board games what is possible. And then what would be the opposite of that? Like your favorite, like dedicate an entire day. Yes. You kind of have to know games to even want to play this thing, but it's still really good.
Great question. Gateway game. I'm going to go back to the tried and tested classic of Settlers of Catan, which I've already mentioned. I think that is still one of the best gateway games out there. Everyone that I've introduced that to likes it immediately because you're rolling dice for a start. Like people like rolling dice. That's another. They just like rolling dice. and also in Catan, you roll dice and you randomly get free stuff. That's one of the big secrets of the game. And you're trading with each other. So it's such a simple game, but the fact that you're randomly getting stuff all the time, even in other people's turns, and you're trading with each other. And you're building up your little empire across the map. So it's got elements of like area control and sort of competition over space and resources. It's got trade, it's got player interaction, it's got randomness, and it plays in like an hour. I think that is still one of the best gateway games out there, and that's why it's still being sold. And it's millions of copies of it have been sold. And yes, there are other games that are similar. There's thousands of other games that are of the same level of Catan and have very similar mechanics. But I would still recommend that one because you can get it at like Walmart or Kmart, or wherever, Costco. You can get it cheap, like $50, $40. It's got pretty nice looking graphics. Like it's very intuitive what you have to do. The little cards have got sheep or wood. It's very clear what you're doing. So I'd still recommend that as the ideal gateway game. And then on the opposite end of that, probably my favorite event game, aside from Axis and Allies, the big Axis and Allies, which is Global 1940. That is awesome. But another one I highly recommend is Twilight Imperium. I don't know if you've had a chance to play that.
Twilight Imperium. I have not had a chance to play that.
Oh, okay. That's
people talk about it all the time since I got into this hobby.
It's so good. It's so good. You just play it once. And then
play it once or twice a year? Or what's your frequency?
I usually play it. Yeah, probably once or twice a year would be, and that's all you need. You're not going to play it every weekend.
But, and why? Why is it so good?
So it's a real nerdy game. You have to be. It's a sci-fi game. There's different alien races, right? But it's good because there's so many things you can do in the game, and there's so many ways you can interact with all the other players. And the setup of the map is such that you all start around the edge, but you're all drawn towards the center because the center of the map is the most valuable
there's this space. Mounting inevitability of conflict.
Yes. Yes. So it's not that the person who controls the center will always win, but if someone takes the center and is allowed to sit on the center for too long, they will win. But if you go for the center first, you put a target on your back and everyone's going to start attacking you. So you have to time when you enter the fray. And if you do it with 6 players, and the fact that you can trade, like your economy is so dependent on trade with other players, that's how you make the most resources. Yeah. And to trade, you have to be adjacent to each other. So you might like send a little spaceship out just to be sitting next to someone else's planet so you can trade with them. And that's how you get the bulk of your resources. And so you have to be on good terms with at least some of your neighbors just to make money. And then, of course, you'll inevitably betray them and stab them in the back. But before that, you have to build up. And there's just so many things you can do. Like there's technology, there's the diplomacy, there's the trade, there's all these like event cards, there's agendas that you can vote on. There's like a galactic senate, and you can vote on a law, and it will change the game state in some way. And every faction there's like 17 factions, and they all have unique rules, and they all have their own flagship. It's like their main spaceship that has a special ability. So like one of them has got like this suicide bomber flagship, and if it dies, everything in the same space dies as well. So you might like send that in on its own just to deliberately get it killed, so it blows everything up. So this, and how we play it is how we have played it in my little game group is you don't have to like tell everyone else what your faction's special ability is. You just you know it, but they don't necessarily know it. So stuff like that flagship that detonates everything in the same space, that's like a secret, and then you can reveal that at the right time. Now that doesn't really work anymore because we all know the rules now. We all know all the factions. But it's the first time that happened was the best. That was like, and I think it happened to me. I think like I lost all of my ships in the middle of the board. I'm like, this is still cool because that's I just like that rule. It's just so awesome. That's a faction ability, even though I didn't win. But that game is just so good, and it's like you've got all these different types of spaceships, and you can upgrade them, and you fight over planets, and you plant your flag on planets, and the map is variable. The map is different every time you play. So that is probably my favorite big event game. Yeah, and so I just play it at least once. Even the guy I mentioned before, Sebastian Bay, who's the US military guy who's pushing for wargaming, and he's like a professor at Georgetown, and he's a Marine, but he loves Twilight Imperium too. That's like his favorite game. And you often like he posts about that on Twitter sometimes, like in between his like serious military stuff. We go, "Oh, I've got to play Twilight Imperium today." So like, I like to imagine all these like serious military types gathered around to be like aliens, and so it's great. So definitely check that out if you haven't played it. Like just play it once. And the rules aren't that complicated. When I describe it, it sounds really complicated. It's not that bad. The rule book is like 10 pages.
Oh, jeez.
Does that sound too high or too low?
No, that sounds very short. The games that I play is like, okay, here we go. I'm going to take a week to learn how to play this game, and then play it once because it's too complex to play again. Yeah. But what about your games? My
own game. I was going to ask you what your favorite games are.
Oh, right. When you're talking about like teaching high schoolers a game, I got into the hobby because I inherited a couple of stepsons, 11 and 13, now they're 12 and 14. So we went through all these different games to figure out something that we all enjoy. And one thing that's on the heavier side that is, I love playing with them is Great Western Trail. And
that's a great game.
You just, and why I love it is because it's very, it's a heavy game because there's so many different things that can happen over the course of the game. But I can always say when it's their turn, you can either do this or this or this. And then they'll have all these consequences. You're going to have to figure that out. But it's just so direct. But just because even though you only have 4 choices in the game, it just, there's so much interaction, and then you're a shepherder, you're a cowboy, and you're just wrestling up sheep, and it's a little economic engine. That's a really good game that I like coming back to a lot. And for the more entry games, I've gone through so many of them that I keep on switching it up. My wife's like, could you just pick one game and we play that for a year and then we go to another game? But I have this problem where I'm like, I really like learning a new game and like going on learning a new game and stuff like that. But I think Cascadia is a really good entry level game. It's very simple. And then on one step above, we really like Earth, where you just build like your own little island and you grow little crops, or you have, it's very kind of National Geographic, the Tableau builder. That's a really good one. We enjoy that game a lot. Those are a couple of good ones. Very nice. I just got into Lord of the Rings, the card game, and good God, it's really attractive to me, but I just got done with the Mines of Moria, and it just got so messy and complex. I'm like, what am I even doing? It kind of stretched me a little too much with all these little things to manage and stuff. But I kind of like pushing that boundary of complexity. But once I lose interest, then I'm like, darn it, I pushed it too far, and now I lost interest. But why did I get into it? So it's like this interesting relationship between that, like learning to master something and then enjoying it once after I learned to play the game. Like, I want to play it again and play it again and play it again. It's an interesting balance as a pure consumer of the hobby.
As a consumer, yeah. So I'm both a consumer and a designer, but my consuming of games has gotten less of late. Yeah, so I'm just focusing on.
So
on the
what are
design.
on the shelves for you? Maybe just the virtual shelves. Like what are some games that you would point people to? Like if they wanted to get a sense of what you
Oh,
do.
the games that I
Is
make.
there
Do you
like
mean?
I'm really interested in these really simple games that you're doing, but I also want you to plug like one or two of your harder games. There was a podcast that you sent me about the Nazi insurgency that sounded really fascinating. It's about the
Yeah.
werewolves. Is it called?
Werewolf, yeah, the werewolves,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's that coin style game that I made. That's the most complex of all the games that I've made, and it's the first one that I made. So, yeah, that one I still play that for fun. I really really like it.
Really?
Yeah, even though
Where
I
can I
play.
buy it? Where can it be found?
So from the website of Legion Wargames, so it's
Okay.
an American based publisher. So
Oh,
Legion
cool.
Wargames, and there's some probably retail outlets or distributors that have it, but mostly it's just through their website. So that is that game. Even if you don't get to play it that much, I put so much work into the historical research for that game and the playbook that comes with it. It's like a 60-page playbook that has just tons and tons of historical background and designers' notes and just lots of really interesting information. So a lot of people who bought the game are like, wow, it's almost worth it just for this book. That
Yeah.
but I play tested that game about 60 times and I'll still go and play it just for fun because I just love it.
Yeah.
And it's just a really it's got everything I like about the Queen series, but some of it simpler in some ways, more complex in others. But there is
You
so
keep on
much
playing it because
character.
it works out differently every time. Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
a
It can go in. It can branch off in so many different directions, and
Yeah.
I just really like that the four factions in the game bounce off each other in a really good way. So, it's a game that I still think it probably is the best game that I've made. I think it best in terms of the amount of effort that went into it, and just like the tapestry of the game is so rich. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be the game that gets played the most because it takes a long time. But for those who want to check out some of my work, that's a very good one to dive into. Like I said, even if you don't get to play it that much, just reading through the rules and reading the playbook is quite entertaining. So that's Werewolf from Legion Wargames. And then another one that I've got out at the moment is 1 Hour World War II, which is with Worthington Publishing. And that is what it says on the box. You can play World War II in an hour. And that's up for 2 to 5 players.
Okay.
That's been very popular. That got funded on Kickstarter a lot quicker than any of my other games because it's just So people really like the idea. So that's another one I recommend that, and you can buy that now. It's been printed. It's in their warehouse, so you can buy it from Worthington Games. Then aside from those two actually exist. Like I've seen the boxes, I've got them. They exist. And then I've got like 10 other games that are in the pipeline about to be going to factories and getting printed off. They're all at different stages of development. The ones that I'm most excited about are still going to take a little while, but I've made 2 religion-themed games. One of them is the entire Old Testament as a card game, but inspired by Seven Wonders. If you played the card game Seven Wonders, it's a tableau builder. So I've done basically that kind of game system, but for literally the whole Old Testament. And then another game I've done is like a sort of a coin game, a 4-faction political game about the life of Jesus and the Roman occupation of Judea. So it's a 4-faction game where you've got Christians, Romans, Pharisees, and Zealots, and it's taking place in occupied Judea. It's got Jerusalem on the map, and like Jesus can be crucified and so on. But it's focusing on the interfaction dynamics of that time and how the Romans are trying to stamp down a Jewish military insurgency, which is the Zealots, whereas the Christians are kind of leading a religious insurgency against the Pharisees, and the Pharisees work with the Romans, and occasionally the Zealots will work with Christians. It's that kind of thing. So that's one that the theme alone is going to get a lot of people paying attention to it. So I'm probably going to get blasted on both sides. Maybe people are going to say it's blasphemous or it's shoving religion down people's throats when they don't want it. But if you want to buy it, you can buy it. But that's still a long way off, and I want to make sure the artwork on that one is really good. So there's those 2. I've got another game coming out on the insurgency in Poland during World War II, so the Polish resistance movements. I've got the one on the Reformation that I told you about, so the wars of the Reformation with the Protestants, the Pope, Habsburgs, England, France, and the Ottoman Empire. So it's a 6-faction game. I've got another game on the Gallipoli campaign, which is like the most important military campaign in Australia's history, where we fought the Turks at Gallipoli. So that's like a short, like plays in about an hour as well, with a couple of different scenarios. That's coming out with the Dietz Foundation probably later this year. And I've got a few other ones that are still on the go, but they haven't been signed up with publishers. I'm not going to reveal anything about them yet, but that's what I've got in the pipeline that is definitely going to be published over the next year or so. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
no, that's awesome. It's always just amazing to interact with somebody who's so invested and so productive. You just have like you're really engaging with your potentials, just creating all this stuff. That's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know why. I just got on a good roll here of just pumping them out. Like I can. Yeah. Oh, and one more game actually that it doesn't have a publisher yet, but I'm sure it will eventually. Is a 4-player game on the feudal system in England. It's an economic game. It's my first Euro. I'm the first time making a Euro game. Yeah, but it's my take on a Euro game. So it's got some war game. So basically, it's the 4 factions of the peasants, the guilds, a monastic order, and the duke. And they're in it's just all takes place in one province in England.
Yeah.
And it's all about there's 10 different resources. So there's like grain and beer and wine and metal and livestock and meat, and so the factions all produce different types of resources and have to trade with each other to try to achieve their goals. So it's like the monastic order needs bread and wine to conduct liturgies in their churches, but they need like the guilds to slaughter the sheep to get the cloth to make the vestments for their monks, and they need the peasants to grow the grain to make the bread, and so on. So it's like there's 4 factions that all have different production that they can do, but they need the other factions. And they can impose feudal dues and obligations on each other. So you can, like, the duke can make the peasants work for him and do little tasks he needs to do.
It's like Twilight Uwe Rosenberg.
Yes. That's a very good. So it's like Agricola, but meets like Coin or Twilight Imperium, like asymmetric different factions. So yeah, that's coming out as well eventually. It just doesn't have a publisher, but eventually when I find a publisher for it. Yeah. So there you go. That's the lineup of games that I've got.
Well, I'll link to what there is to link to down in the description, as well as your Twitter, because you're rather active on Twitter. And thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk with me. This has been an awesome conversation.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's great.
It's been great to meet you and get into your geekery.
Yes, I always enjoy talking about games. Any chance I get to talk about games, I'm happy with that. So. Yeah, and thank you for having me on the show.
My pleasure. Let me end the recording. There we go.